Thank you for inviting me to present on Cinderella. And the best training that I got at the Jung Institute in Zurich were the many courses that I had on fairy tales and the inclusion of fairy tale amplification in lectures. Then, as now, one of the biggest final exams in Zurich was a 6-hour exam to interpret a fairy tale that you had not seen before, and you can use all the symbol dictionaries that you wanted. We formed many groups to practice interpreting fairy tales, and that was the ideal training for learning how to work with dreams and cultural phenomena like films in an archetypal and symbolic manner. And the approach to working with fairy tales is similar to how I work with dreams. So I will be referencing at various points tonight the article Tips on Dream Interpretation. I think you have that translated into Chinese. And what one most wants to develop as a Jungian is what I call a symbolic eye and symbolic logic. There have been many times in my now 41 years of practice that I have said things in a session that I had not read, but they just came to me like a second nature because of the symbolic sense I got from working with fairy tales. Okay, so that's the where the Jung Institute now is in Küsnacht, and the library where we took the big exam was second floor, far left, indelibly etched in my mind. So what I'll do now is I'll just put on the screen slides that talk about some of the basic elements of fairy tale interpretation. And I'll just show it. And since this is being recorded, you can look at it later. And I think, Coco, I think you did make the translation of all those slides. And then you can send it out to the people viewing tonight so they can read it on their own. Because it's just basic stuff about what the king means, what the queen means, um, different things like that, because I really want to focus on a detailed look at Cinderella and have time for the group to ask questions. So every 2 or 3 years, what happens is the Chicago Jung Institute that I belong to has me come down to teach a course on fairy tales. These two fairy tales, Grimm's Cinderella and Iron Hans, are two very complete and compact tales that address some of the most fundamental archetypes, the wounding of feminine energy and the challenges of handling what I call testosterone energy in its many levels of manifestation. And this is an image from the book Iron Hans. So in this course, I will be looking for the eco-psychological dimensions of Cinderella as well, and make many references to the I Ching and Taoism because this is a course for the Chinese. Master of fairy tales and Jung's main collaborator, the great Marie-Louise von Franz, who had the privilege of hearing lecture, said that, quote, fairy tales are the purest and simplest expression of collective unconscious psychic processes. They represent the archetypes in their simplest, barest, and most concise form. Okay, and then I'll just show the next slide and leave it on the screen for a bit. Like I said, because this is being recorded and I don't want to spend a lot of time on the basics, I assume that many of you have already had courses in fairy tales, maybe even one on Cinderella. Here's the next slide about fairy tales being compositional motifs. In the next slide, the three-part structure of fairy tales. Next slide, ideas are presented in images in fairy tales, and then using the four functions to interpret them. And then saying that it takes me 4 days to work up a fairy tale. And then the last slide about the disco ball motif. So on this slide here, I mentioned that for those of you who have ever made a video or a short film, you know how carefully every image, word, sound effect, and music are carefully and painstakingly selected to develop a particular theme. Nothing is randomly inserted. That's how dreams are constructed. And what I'll say is that even more so than dreams, um, that is true in fairy tales, especially something like these complete fairy tales, what I call them complete fairy tales, Cinderella and Iron Hearts. Because in those fairy tales, things can happen like a minimum number of time, three, and then they can go on to the next phase. But in real life and in your dreams, it can get stuck at the three phase for a long time and may never go beyond that. But in fairy tales, it's like the most compact presentation of the dynamics of life. And what I might say, and I can show this again later on if it needs to be, if it doesn't come through very clear now, but this is the first time after teaching this course at least 10 times that I've actually written it all out because I had to prepare the notes for Coco to translate. So this is what I'd worked from all the years. I had Xeroxed the page, and then I had all these notes about what the different symbols meant and so on and so on. And then I would just lecture from those notes. But like I said, when you actually write things out, things become a little clearer, and you also make some connections that you don't make if you're just speaking off the top of your head. So this will be the most thorough presentation I've ever given on what I think is the most important fairy tale on the planet because it deals with the most important issue, namely love. When I teach the fairy tale course at Chicago Jung Institute, I give the students a handout where I've photocopied the symbol dictionary descriptions of every symbol in the fairy tale so the students can practice selecting the relevant elements of every symbol. And I'll hold this up, and again, I can show this when I'm full screen later on if you want to see it. But on here, I have heel, lentil, pea, pear, pearl, purity, pitch, and so on. But like I said, it's way too much for Coco to translate all of this. But what you do is you take the relevant elements from each of those individual symbols that are relevant to a storyline that's developing, and that's how you do it. Let's start working with Cinderella, working this in some detail. And I will be incorporating many of the notes from Jungian analyst Catherine Asper. In her course on Cinderella, I took in my last year of training in Zurich, which was in 1982, plus a published series of lectures she gave 13 years later in the Philippines. And this is a picture of Catherine Asper. So Asper noted that Cinderella is one of the most well-known fairy tales, one that most people can identify with. There are over 1,000 variants worldwide, including those where Cinderella is a young man, thus illustrating the universal archetypal nature of the tale. The earliest datable version goes back to China in 850 to 860 AD, and it bears a remarkable resemblance to European versions recorded centuries later. So in some ways, I'm kind of bringing Cinderella back to the country where it may have started, in China. So Cinderella deals with that most basic human experience of feeling abandoned, valueless, worthless, and unliked because of losing the mother in us. This happens when a child loses a mother through death or other causes, like a child being ill and separated from the mother, or by divorce or by a catastrophe. So Jung suffered greatly from his mother being hospitalized when he was 4 years old. She terrified him at night during his youth. And I wrote about the effect on that on Jung of the absence of the nurturing side of the great mother archetype in my book, The Cry of Merlin, Jung, the prototypical eco-psychologist. In the appendix, Jung's Eros wound and his image of God. We can lose mother energy, become insecure at any point in our life, as when our mothers die, when we feel that loss in a crisis, a breakup in a relationship, the loss of a sense of well-being, loss of one's profession, etc. So just say a word about that appendix. I related it to personality number 2 that was with Jung for a good part of his childhood. And in personality number 2 was something he escaped into when his relationship with his parents were going bad, or he felt terrible about himself. And that was God's world. We felt he was looking down from God's perspective, but there were no humans in it. So this was this incredible dissociative ability, if you will, that Jung had. And I think it affected his image of God, where there was a frightening dimension to it. And like I said, the way I analyzed it is that the archetype that was really strong in Jung's psyche was the absence of the loving, supportive mother. And the person who really addressed the consequences of that is Donald Kalsched in his book, Trauma of the Soul. He basically says that this was kind of an undiagnosed side of Jung that he himself was blind to. And Kalsched addresses that very strongly in his book, like I said, Trauma and the Soul. One more comment about that. I think Jungian psychology's conceptual system is so complete that you can even apply it to Jung and say, this was your blind spot. This was the archetypal energies that you were missing, and you can plug it right back into Jung's system. What I'll do now then is I'll go through this fairy tale, paragraph by paragraph, sometimes line by line or image by image, and it opens with, the wife of a rich man fell sick. And as she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, be good and pious, and then the good God will protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." Thereupon she closed her eyes and departed. Every day the maiden went out to her mother's grave and wept, and she remained pious and good. When winter came, the snow spread a white sheet over the grave, and by the time the spring sun had drawn it off again, the man had taken another wife. One spends the most time on the first paragraph of a fairy tale because it lays out the basic archetypal situation that one will be engaging. The wife of a rich man fell sick. Note how generic this is. There are no names, no countries, no time frame, etc. Just a man and a woman. In other words, basic life experiences archetypal. The gestalt is excess energy in the masculine realm and a sick feminine. That's what this fairy tale is addressing. The woman has only one child, a daughter, that transfers the problem to the next generation. Cinderella thus becomes the hero in the story. She has the task of putting together a terrible situation that her mother was not able to resolve. The hero's task is to restore a healthy, normal functioning in an individual or a country, where all the egos of a nation have deviated from their instinctual basic pattern of wholeness, a pattern that may need to be revamped and adapted to different cultural environments. Cinderella incarnates the healing processes of the self, the story of an individual or society with hope and courage to change a dysfunctional, unhealthy situation. A film with this type of heroine is Katniss Everdeen in Hunger Games that I wrote about on my blog. So an aphorism is, archetypal mother is, I will love you no matter what. Archetypal father is, I will love you if you can prove yourself. We need both. It is helpful to consider the positive and negative aspects of situations and symbols. So we have the time. So I will go through these next slides about positive yang and yin energy. Positive yang and archetypal father energy is most concisely expressed in an article by Thomas More that I hand out to almost all my analysts called The Lost Father. It's only 3 pages, but it's beautiful. More describes father energy as that of direction, authority, understanding, governance, tradition, and protection. It is also a procreativity that enables you to manifest your unique nature. It gives you personal authority, an inner sense of wisdom, independent thought, and a unique lifestyle. One could add to the list objectivity, logos, and law and order. So the negative father aspects, and like I said, it's always good to consider the positive and negative aspects of everything. The negative father aspects are authoritarianism, dominance, overpowering, the stagnation of rigid structures, defensiveness, and self-serving interest. In the I Ching, the Yang Yang is associated with light, impulsive, breaking up, spreading out, firmness, and dryness. The old Yang is those qualities in excess, blinding, destructiveness, brittleness, and lifeless dryness. So the beauty of the I Ching is that the old lines change to their opposites in creating a second hexagram. So the old yang, the 9, becomes a yang yin, an 8, as symbolized by the yin yang symbol. You can see that in the heart of light, there's a dark spot. In the heart of darkness, there's a light spot. There's no purity of black or white. And I think that that symbol, that yin yang symbol, really helped Jung think of an alternative to the Christian extremism of all good or all evil that he wrote about in Answer to Job. I've often said that Jung could have written the I Ching. To me, it's totally congruent with Jung's thoughts, but it's most likely the other way around, that the I Ching so deeply affected Jung that it affected his whole conceptual system. And it's the main reason that I'm so interested in Chinese culture and have liked to visit China. I've been there twice now with these international Jung and Chinese cultural conferences, is because of the I Ching. I just want to have a feel for what it's like to be in the culture that way back gave birth to something as profound as the I Ching. So if you put this symbol into our fairy tale, it's basically that white yang, that would be the rich father part, and that black dot in the middle of the yang, that would be the sick wife and Cinderella. So Cinderella then would be that dark yin energy, and that white yang is what is the animus, or the positive animus energy, the possibilities there that will lead to the transformation of the feminine in conjunction with working together with a helpful yang energy. So this is an example of the changing lines for those of you, just to review how it works, that you generate your hexagram, and the changing lines there would be the 3rd from the bottom, the 9 in the 3rd place, and the 6 in the 5th place, the 5th from the bottom. And those changing lines change into their opposites to create the next hexagram. The unchanging lines stay as they are. So that's how you get the hexagram for the future. So then the consideration of archetypal mothering energy, which is associated with caring, sensitivity, compassion, and relational connections. Yin energy is associated with the dark, moist, containing, bringing together, soft, and becoming. In excess, it is darkness as chaos and loss of one's way, emotional flooding, passivity, and a smothering containment. So the old yin, 6, reverts to its opposite, a 7, a young yang. So a consideration about the rich man, beyond the accumulation of excess yang energy, is the materialism of wealth and its association with power. This perspective is borne out by the stepdaughters we will soon meet, who are beautiful and focused on beautiful clothes, jewelry, and so on. The pursuit of money and prestige as a central aim in life often leads to ruthless behavior and a sacrifice of relatedness and eros. Contrary to the commercials promoting consumerism, money beyond a certain level cannot buy happiness and a meaning in life. And I might add, Coco, that this is where the Grimm's version is much more powerful psychologically than the version that Walt Disney used, which was based on the French Perrault. And in that version, the stepsisters were ugly. It's much more meaningful that the stepsisters are beautiful. I think I mentioned this in my notes later on, but I connect that with the hexagram of grace, the beauty of form. And Confucius was upset one time when he got that hexagram. It's the beauty of the surface, like the vulgar gold in alchemy, but it can hide a lot of darkness within. So a woman with a rich father complex may not be in touch with her feminine energy. Too much may be into her studies, career, and so on, her so-called masculine side or animus. In a man, Cinderella can be his anima. The Cinderella story can be viewed as a compensation for a patriarchal society with a weak, insecure feminine side beneath societal and cultural riches. I don't know what it's like in China, but in America, we're a big consumer culture. It's 70% of our economy. And you're being told all the time that if you buy this product, it'll make you feel good or attractive or whatever. So this the Cinderella story is particularly relevant here in America from that perspective. So Cinderella's mother is sick and dies. The feminine is associated more with the earth, hexagram 2, the receptive, Mother Earth, the body and matter and groundedness. Telling Cinderella on her deathbed to be good and pious, and mother will always be looking down on you from heaven, presents special problems. It is inhibiting to be devoted to a spirit of a mother who was able to resolve the problem of being married to a rich man. Being good and pious didn't resolve the problem for Cinderella. Plus, the problem has been moved into the spiritual realm and will create problems in relating to the body, dark emotions, and sexuality. It's like level 3 anima, the feminine raised to a spiritual level and not embodied in the world like a level 4 anima imaged as the Mona Lisa or in Leonard Cohen's song Suzanne. So Cinderella tried being pious and good during her mourning process, where she visited her mother's grave every day and wept, but that didn't lead to a better period. She entered a psychic winter of being cold, dead, frozen, and without feeling. This would be a depressive state of feeling one is not even able to feel, of being petrified. So Osber reminds us that, quote, grieving and mourning include a state of numbness, then a state of searching and longing, then a separation period where a real full mourning takes you out of life again. But if the mourning process is stopped or unfinished, it remains unfinished business. The psyche freezes, end of quote. One may go on living, but the depression may last a long time especially if there has been early bereavement. And notice how this psychological state and what happened uh, in conjunction with it was expressed by that line in the first paragraph. When winter came, the snow spread a white sheet over the grave, and by the time the spring sun had drawn it off again, the man had taken another wife. So this image of like snow being a sheet that's spread over the grave, and then in spring it's a sheet that's removed. I just love that metaphor. So weather and seasonal metaphors are very powerful ways of metaphorically describing psychological states. And that's one thing that comes through very strongly in the I Ching, makes a lot of weather and seasonal analogies and agricultural analogies too. So Cinderella suffered an emotional abandonment from her absent father, who did not help her mourn. It can happen that the surviving parent is so overwhelmed they cannot be there for their children, leaving the children to feel doubly abandoned. Feelings want or needed to be shared in order to enable them to come into existence to belong to us. Cinderella didn't have a transcendent Tao to pray to, no God or Virgin Mary. The psychic winter, the snow on the mother's grave, is a symbol of unfinished mourning process that leads the psyche into depression, into hardship, into a development that is not towards life, but is rather into the ashes, and to the stepmother and to the two nasty sisters. So let's look at an objective situation of there being a sick mother in the family. This can cause a child to grow up early to become a parent, especially I think if you're like the oldest daughter. And it can lead to a wounded or shaky ego self axis, leading to a narcissistic disturbance and a negative mother complex. The child can feel insecure and not well protected. So subjectively, there will be difficulties mothering yourself. An abandonment complex, no mother to model, and a spiritualized or idealized mother mentioned before that leaves out the dark side, the emotions, and the body. A child can think of itself as bad if the mother dies. It can think of itself as being the one that caused the mother to die. So another way a negative mother complex can arise is with a narcissistically wounded mother, where the child is there to mirror the mother instead of the mother's healthy mirroring of the child. Or the weak mother may treat a young child as a confidant and share marital or financial distress information that is overwhelming for the child to deal with. So what happens next, what takes over, the new development in the spring of the fairy tale, is the man taking another wife. We read, the woman had brought with her into the house two daughters who were beautiful and fair of face, but vile and black of heart. Now began a bad time for the poor stepchild. Is the stupid goose to sit in the parlor with us? They said. He who wants to eat bread must earn it. Out with the kitchen wench. They took her pretty clothes away from her, put on an old gray bedgown on her, and gave her wooden shoes. Just look at the proud princess, how decked out she is. They cried and laughed and led her into the kitchen. There she had to work hard from morning till night, get up before daybreak, carry water, light fires, cook and wash. So the second wife indicates a change in the father world in relation to the feminine. It's now about surface beauty, vanity, wealth, appearance, and materialism presented as the mother and her daughters. There is no heart, no eros, and relatedness. Surface beauty covers up the emptiness and the buried grief within, kind of what I mentioned before. So three psyches got constellated when Cinderella's mourning came to a dead end. The psychic winter of depression. The stepmother is the cold, poisonous witch. Oh, I didn't have that up before. My apologies, but we've already gone through that.
Yeah.
So the stepmother is the cold, poisonous witch, the dark side of the mother, the negative mother complex that is often at the core of a depression. Our heroine, Cinderella, bears the tension of the split between the all good goddess and the witch. Things can get overvalued and undervalued. The punishing inner mother makes one unable to love oneself, to see one's own beautiful soul and talents as the beauty in life is taken away. One's exhibitionist side is inhibited and we feel isolated. An inner voice of the mothers and sisters who tells her that she is ugly and stupid. We need to think of Cinderella, this story, as all happening within one person. So the mother side of Cinderella would have this beautiful, like positive image, and the ugly mother side, and her side, like her generation side, would have this beautiful, showy, wealthy surface, and the subservient, ugly um, inner side. So it's one thing to describe the symptoms of depression and everything, but the reality of it comes in what's happening in our dreams, the storyline. So just think of this storyline here of having a stepmother, wealthy sisters that are putting you down, saying you're ugly, making you do all this work. That's what it feels like to be caught in this complex. So the story continues. They had her do hard work. Beside this, the sisters did her every imaginable injury. They mocked her and emptied her peas and lentils into the ashes and forced her to sit and pick them out again. In the evening, when she had worked till she was weary and she had no bed to go to, but had to sleep by the hearth in the cinders. As on that account, she always looked dusty and dirty, they called her Cinderella. So, as the kitchen wench, Cinderella did all the hard work of preparing the food, but she could not eat it. Doing drudge work from morning to night and always being on the run is the way workaholics cover up for their underlying despair. They can never enjoy the success of their work, but rush on to the next project. Life is a grind, a drag. So when the archetypal nourishing side of the great mother is poisoned, psychologically nourishing and mothering oneself is a pain. Throwing the peas and lentils that you have prepared into the ashes is a form of self-sabotage. So in the fairy tale, it's about the mother throwing the lentils into the ashes, but within the psyche, it's your inner poisonous mother that's doing that to you. So this is an example then of the symbol dictionary that I worked with. So it tells us that lentils are associated with cattle food and with poor man's food. And the pea is described as one, this is how it's listed in the Vries, sacred to the Irish great goddess Ein, who planted them in the night when her son complained of the barrenness of the soil. Two, love, a lucky gift among lovers. Three, respect. So throwing the peas and lentils into the ashes would be a denigration of those associations. So I will stop share here, and then we'll go back to see how people are responding to this. Like I said, I went through this. I wanted to be sure to get the basics out there. And unfortunately, I'm going to leave us in a pretty depressed state tonight. This is before things begin to turn. So I kind of hate to leave you at this point, but it will next week. It'll start to turn. This is about as dismal as it gets. So Coco, I might add one more thing. I mentioned earlier that it would take me 3 days to work up a fairy tale. But because this is the first time I wrote it out, and I incorporated this article by Osper that I hadn't seen before, I was immersed in this fairy tale for about a month, and it was beginning to affect my dreams. And I had a dream where one of the images was the pail that I used to carry the ashes out from our fireplace after the wood had burned down. So it was my ash bucket. So that was a sign to me how. So I was glad, I must confess, when I finished the lecture notes for the whole course about a week ago. That's long enough to be immersed in this tale. It's emotionally a very heavy tale. This is something like our bucket looked like to take the ashes out with.
Yeah.
And that very bucket was in my dreams. I've never dreamt about the ash bucket. So, in reflecting upon the dream that night, I said, I know what this is about. I've been working with this fairy tale too long. Feel what it's like not to be mothered from without or within. And the second is, what is your response to that? Do you become a workaholic? Do you just work hard so you never have to face the grief? Do you go out and do a lot of shopping? Do you eat a lot? What are the ways that you particularly, you don't have to share it here, but you can ask yourself that question. What are your ways of covering up or trying to cover up the grief? And that may be the things uh, that you may have to get underneath and actually deal with the grief and go through it to be able to come out the other end and not be stuck forever with this underlying depression.
So,
Mhm.
and would you like to say something about its symbolism?
Yeah, three is a dynamic numbers. Um, and like things often happen in three before they can go on to the next phase of something. It's kind of a minimal number of occurrences, and we'll see it in Cinderella. We're starting next week just to give you a little hope. She makes three wishes. First wish is for what knocks her father's hat off, and then she makes two wishes to be able to go to the ball. She goes to the ball three times and leaves the ball three times. So it's about things building, and one of the ways and in one of its most fundamental ways, and I'll draw a little image here, is this strange thing that Jungians like to talk about, the Maria Prophetessa. And it's out of the one comes the two, and out of the two comes the three, and out of the three comes the one as the fourth. And this is the way I diagrammed it in one of my volumes. So there's an initial state of oneness, all right? And then something comes into consciousness. You often see it in dreams where there are two things, something entering consciousness. To be conscious, you have to discriminate between one thing and the other. Another way of thinking about it is that you're in a complex. There's like the good and bad mother. And then the three is the recognition that you're in a complex, but that doesn't mean it goes away. Then out of the three comes the one as the fourth, back to some original sense of wholeness, to the original oneness, and then that leads to a fourness, an integration and a consciousness of it. So out of the one comes the two, out of the two comes the three, and out of the three comes the one as the four. And this is my diagram for it. So I'll just hold it up while you describe that.
那我们就继续往下哈。So could we get the paper you mentioned about more the lost father? And we
Oh,
are very
I would be
interested in
happy
it.
to send that. Through the years, there are certain things that I think are so basic and fundamental that I always keep a copy of them in my office and I hand them out. So I'll send that to you. I've given it to just about every analysan, male and female.
Why you share this paper to them, all of them?
Why do I share it? Um, uh, because I'm an introverted thinking type, and I like things that are orderly and concise, um, and that really say powerful psychological stuff in a minimal amount of space. And this particular article uses dream examples as well. And it talks about the father as the animus for a woman, and the father, the positive father, as like a positive male image for a man. So it covers so many bases in a little less than 3 pages. So I'll send that to you. It's an article way back from about the mid 1980s, when Robert Bly did a great service, I think, to the men by developing this fairy tale, Grimm's tale, fairy tale Iron Hans that he called Iron John. So there was a whole article in a psychology journal called Voices dedicated to the male psyche. And this article by Thomas More was in that journal. So maybe I'll say one more thing there, particularly with regard to Cinderella. What we see in this tale, I think, is largely a tale by the excessive, old, oppressive, yang energy. So it's good to have an article that talks about what positive yang energy is. And that is not really developed in this tale. It's mostly about how Cinderella recovers her sense of the archetypal feminine in a positive form, but it really leaves kind of unresolved what is the change in the masculine. And that's what I like about the fairy tale Iron Hans, because it deals more with the masculine. And that's a problem that I see in our American society, where we have a lot of so-called liberated women, but we have a lot of young men that don't know how to deal with their masculine energy in relationship to those women. And a film that I and a lot of men had trouble with was this popular movie called Barbie, where the women really talk about all the ways they've been put down and everything, but the men look terrible in there. So I'll say no more about that.
So in your slides, in the last slide, you mentioned that for some girls who cannot be mothering for themselves externally and internally, they cannot have dreams even, or they can have no access to their unconscious. So could you please say more about them?
Yeah. If you think the way Jung talked about the unconscious as the realms of the mothers and the more historical layers in the unconscious, so we're talking about like the deep layers of the collective unconscious, that the realm of the mothers then associated with the unconscious, if you really have a negative mother complex, it's hard to access your unconscious material. And you may have to work with somebody for a while in therapy before they can remember their dreams or are able to work with their dreams. You can be so destroyed by that that negative mother, if you will, that if you think of it, that the unconscious as the source of dreams and everything can have a negative and frightening dimension to approach it. So instead of unconscious, put mother in there. If your inner mother is really negative, your unconscious is going to look pretty negative and frightening. So it will be a while before you're working with a therapist or an analyst to have enough trust and human connection where you can begin to feel something that's not poisonous and that's not looking at you with narcissistic eyes or poisonous eyes. That's what the therapist connection with the client, the patient, the analysan has to be. So the therapist may be offering some of the first and continuous and strong mothering energy for a person in their life.
Could you like to amplify more about the Cinderella picking up the beans from the ashes?
Yeah, that bit I got from Osper too, if you will, in the 13 years between my taking her course and what she later presented. And so you're talking about food, but what should be food for you? And since she was working in the kitchen, she's the one who had to do all the difficult work of preparing the food. But for her to be able to eat it, it was this grunge work, this difficult work of your food basically being surrounded by, encoded in ashes. So there's no like positive association to the food. Or your association to it is like dirt and something that's burned out. So there's nothing, instead of something nurturing you, nourishing you, you have the association of the ashes and the depression. So that's where Osper, I thought, really beautifully said that it's like people that just work and never enjoy the fruits of their labor. They can't stop. It's like a workaholic. You always got to go on the next project. You always have to have something to be doing. So it's that drudge part that really came through, I think, very strongly in that food in the ashes motif. So put yourself into this situation. So imagine that you were Cinderella. Imagine that you were working hard morning till night, doing all the grunge work, all the difficult work, preparing the food and everything. And then day after day, like here we only had three times. What? We didn't say how long. It just said this went on, but we don't know how long. Day after day, you just have your food thrown into the ashes. This just goes on and you don't see it ever ending. Just try to feel what that would be like. That's what fairy tales do. You got to feel into them.
Frustration, meaningless, desperate.
Mm-hmm. This is where it's nice to be in a room with a group, and then for these different things, you can ask the people in the group. You get all these different perspectives, but we have the archetype per se, and then what people say about it, how they've experienced that in their life. That would be like the archetypal images, the particular unique images and experiences, or something in the dreams of an individual that are unique experience of this basic archetypal theme.
So could you please say more about the sister images in the fairy tales? For example, in Cinderella, it's the stepsisters, and in Saki's fairy tale or
Right.
myths, and she has two elder sisters,
Yeah.
and would you like combine the young the young in Yi Jing to
Mm-hmm.
talk about this?
No, that's such an important element, and that's why I say this fairy tale where the stepsisters are beautiful. Um, you have to look at it as this is the consequence or what happens when one is not able to grieve fully. The particular reasons in this tale were because the mother died and told her daughter to be good and pious. Well, that didn't work. Didn't work for the mother. It's not going to work for Cinderella. So when you're stuck in that state of the sick mothering, then what comes in as presented in this tale is not only the stepmother with the hard heart, but the beautiful sisters. So you have this beautiful surface presentation that looks good to the world, and we'll find out in the escapes from the ball how that that feminine that is so attractive to the masculine can be something that destroys some of the essence of the feminine. That will become clear, like I say, when it escapes from the ball. But the main message, and this is where I differ from Osper, I think the main storyline is this overwhelming Liang energy, this overwhelming masculine that traps the feminine in the form of beauty, maybe sex, and so on, and motherhood, but and serving the masculine, but does not allow within that opening context a place for the feminine, the yin energy to find its natural whole base. I would like to put this in the broadest cultural and human context. So the archetypes are relevant at many levels. So we can look at it intrapsychic, but at the broadest psychic level, it relates to what I most emphasize in Jung and the environment, Jungian ecopsychology. Jung coined the terms New Age and Age of Aquarius in 1940 for a paradigm shift he felt was inevitably coming to the West and countries affected by the West, which includes China, of course. And one of the attributes of the New Age would be a rise in archetypal feminine energy. So the way he saw some of the dominant problems in the West was this excessive yang energy. And like I said, I don't know what I don't have a deep feeling for what it's like for the feminine in Chinese culture, but we certainly have some sense of it here in America. And that's what so many people, feminists especially, call the patriarchy. I have a little bit of trouble with that term, but just most broadly speaking, and then most fundamental level, that's what Cinderella is about. So just to peek into the future of this tale, we find that the king and Cinderella's father lives within that kingdom. The kingdom is without a queen. The queen is not mentioned in this tale. What we have is a young man, in other words, the next generation of the masculine, looking for a queen, looking for new feminine energy. All right. And that feminine energy is what Cinderella is going to be cultivating. And it's a feminine energy that comes to her from within. Those birds and the trees and so on that grew out of her mother's grave, that's connecting with the archetypal feminine, something connected with nature, with what I think of Lao Tzu talking about the Tao, pointing to the great mother, the mother of all, the origin of the 10,000 things. That's the archetypal dimension that I think Cinderella is tapping into if you look at it through the lens of the Grimm's fairy tale, especially.
Right. The last question is about the mothering. And in terms of the Cinderella, and she had a good mom and the stepmother afterwards. And the question is it everyone like us have the two split part inside of us, the good mother and the bad mother, and we need to integrate them. And in clinic, and as the therapist, how to understand or what we need to do to help the client to find their inner mothering?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. I think we got to start with questioning how good Cinderella's mom was to begin with. We're talking about a woman that is sick. She doesn't die suddenly. She's not shot. She doesn't die in a car accident. She's sick. She's been ill, weakened for a long time. That's not a very good positive role model for a mother. So, and then her way, the mother's way of dealing with it is I'll just speak as an American and in this Christian culture to the extent that is that the mother's way can be like the Virgin Mary. Uh, there's a joke in a radio series we used to have called Lake Wobegon, and the Catholic Church in the town was called Our Lady of Perpetual Responsibility. So I kind of think of that's the model that Cinderella had, this mother that was just giving everything to the father, but she was weakened, perhaps, and this is many ways you can play with the tale, by being too motherly, um, giving too much, not having enough animus to say, that's enough. I got to take care of myself. I can't be the caregiver forever to all my family and my ailing parents, that the caregiver has to survive herself. So, and then the second part of the question about mothering in therapy or in yourself. Yeah, you want to start with as an analyst or a therapist, especially if you're depth psychologist by Jungian, you got to start with asking or trying to get a sense of how strong your positive mothering energy is and what are the inhibitions. What is that perhaps it's because of too much yang energy that's your mother. You have to try to get some sense, and this is where you come from your own analysis of where your mothering energy has been weakened, your archetypal good mother. That's where you start. And then in working with people, uh, that is one of the fundamental things you try to keep track of in as many metaphoric presentations in your interaction with the person, transference, countertransference stuff, their dreams. I even try to look at their symptoms in a archetypal way, like, for example, eating disorders and so on. That's so much connected with the mothering and nature. But there's a whole, like I said, a whole realm of that stuff. So final comments. So the second part of that thing about getting some sense of the love, the type of mothering within yourself is then what were your defenses? What were your compensations? What were the things that you do that cover for the discrepancies in the mothering within? So Coco, if you could move your plant back in there a bit. It was inserting itself before. Right?
Yeah，我这个
So
花
that's
倒下来了啊。
the good news is next week we'll start seeing some greening and growth in this tail. I hate to leave you in this depressive state, but we'll start with some twig and some green and some growth next week.
对，希望我这个误闯进来的这个花儿哈，能给大家带来一些不同的感觉。就是老师也不希望把大家留在这么抑郁消沉的一个状态之下。我们看到了绿色哈，这也是我们下次课我们就会看到哈，这个绿植呀、发展呐、一些转变就会发生了。